Thank you, member. Leader of the third party.
Thank you, and welcome to the new position as Assistant Deputy Speaker. It gives me great honour to speak as not the first, but the second person under your oversight. I thank the member from Kamloops, South North Thompson, for his remarks. I must say, Honourable Speaker, somewhat cynical in the remarks, but I understand that, and I do share some of his concerns about the throne speech, and I'll come to that in more detail lately. The member from Peace River North suggests that I'm cynical too, but I beg to differ with the member. I am the designated speaker, Honourable Speaker. I know members opposite are looking forward to you hear them groaning in delight, but the member from Vancouver West End is quite excited by the words to come. Let me start, Honourable Speaker, please with thanking my staff in the Legislative Assembly for helping us in the BC Green Caucus do the work that we do day in, day out. It's without their support we would not be able to be prepared for issues like this, speeches like this. I'm very grateful to the work of the staff, both in the legislation and the constituent office as well, and to more generally the people in this building, whether it be the guards, whether it be in the cafeteria, the people who clean, the people who take off, or even Libby, who's now upstairs somewhere ushering people into the gallery. You know, it must be tough for these people, Honourable Speaker, to work here knowing that there's a cloud over this place. And let it be said that we are very grateful for the hard work that they do, and we'll all move beyond this. So thank you to the people who work here. And to the public service in general. None of these bills that we're going to debate in the upcoming session would be possible were it not for the hard work by the public service. And let me tell you, Honourable Speaker, it is my experience that British Columbia has the best and brightest from all across Canada in our public service. I say that because it's one of our key strategic strengths. It is the quality of life in British Columbia that we can offer people, which is why we can attract and retain some of the best and brightest. It's also one of the reasons why we have an affordability issue, is people choose to live in BC because it is a lovely place to live. Great economy, great weather, except the last couple of days. Wonderful people, friendly, relaxed atmosphere, and never a dull moment in the BC legislature either. So it's lots to do here in British Columbia. And finally, to the people of Oak Bay Gordon Head, I thank them for entrusting me as their representative in this place. I have countless meetings with constituents, and I do appreciate the ongoing feedback that they give. Thank you to them. So now to the throne speech. Let me start by saying that I'm pleased that the throne speech did recognize the important work that's been achieved on a number of priority initiatives outlined in our confidence and supply agreement with the BC NDP. That agreement, written a couple of years ago, basically put in writing our shared values that collectively we wish to focus on as a condition of our support in this minority government. Values with respect to affordability, values with respect to putting people first, education, childcare, and so forth. But in particular, in this throne speech, one of the things that I think is critical, at least from my perspective, is that it highlighted the importance of Clean BC, a framework that will guide British Columbia as we respond to the challenge, and yet realize that it is but an opportunity. That is, the challenge of climate change is actually an economic opportunity. Let's be clear, Honourable Speaker. Clean BC is not a climate plan. Clean BC is an economic vision. It's a vision for the economy of British Columbia grounded in innovation, grounded in clean energy, and grounded in positioning British Columbia as a leader in the new economy. It's the BC Green vision, Honourable Speaker. It's a vision that we recognize is what is needed to position British Columbia as leaders in the new economy. We, Honourable Speaker, will never compete with our traditional resource sectors if we continue to do more of the same. We can't compete with Indonesia. We can't compete with Thailand in terms of just digging dirt out of the ground. The reason why, of course, Honourable Speaker, is that they don't internalize some of the externalities that are so precious to us. Environmental externalities, social externalities, standard of living externalities. It costs more to dig dirt out of the ground in BC than it does in other jurisdictions. So we won't compete head to head unless we continue down the path of race for the bottom economics, which I'll come to shortly, a card that the BC NDP have taken from the Liberal play deck, but actually taken it to a whole new level, and we'll come to that moving forward. The way we compete, Honourable Speaker, is by recognizing that we have to be smarter and more efficient. You can't grow the economy just by doing more of the same. You grow it through efficiency. And what does efficiency mean? It means when we dig that dirt out of the ground, we do so in a manner that is cleaner and it's more efficient, and that as such, we can actually export not only the dirt and the minerals that arise, but also the technology and knowledge that has been acquired in the development of efficiency measures. I've referenced many times in various speeches an innovative company by the name of MindSense that developed sensing technology in bucket face that can actually take rock at the rock face and actually determine at the face whether it's economical to ship that rock to the crushers or whether it should be put aside for fill later. That is being smarter and that is being more efficient, because not only can MindSense then mine mines in BC relative and compete internationally, but there's technology that is BC-based, internationally leading technology that we can export. And not only export, we can actually send our people there to other jurisdictions to showcase some of these technologies. And it saves money. It saves money because less water is used in the crushing process, which is cleaner. And it saves money by not having to worry so much about the backfill. So these are the kind of technologies that we need to position ourselves. Forestry, probably the single most important industry historically in British Columbia. Forestry. Hardly a mention in the throne speech about forestry. Few words, but hardly a mention. Yet our opportunities for innovation in the forest sector, whether it be through value added, like people like Structurlam, incredible crosslam and glulam manufacturing company based in Okanagan Springs and Penticton. My friend from Penticton's not here. Amazing company, BC-based technology, led to Okanagan Falls. What did I say? I'm thinking beer, Honourable Speaker. I'm thinking beer, not. So it's the member from Langley East correctly pointed out that I said Okanagan Spring as opposed to Okanagan Fall. Clearly, my craft beer senses were getting. I was getting thirsty, I think. So, anyway, with a company that's built crosslam and glulam that led to the highest wood constructed building in the world, UBC 18-story student residence, our beautiful Harbour Air, crosslam and glulam projects. This is where we have opportunities for innovation. We talk about building schools and hospitals, lots of that in the throne speech, but we're not talking about building schools and hospitals that showcase innovation and allow us to position ourselves as leader in the new economy. Each school and hospital that's built is an opportunity for innovation. We could build a bunch of brick walls and hammer some drywall together, or we can recognize that by spending a little more now, it may not even be more, in fact, many would argue it's the same cost or even slightly less. We can save in the long term through operating cost reductions in terms of heat and so forth. So I really think that we need to recognize that Clean BC is a plan, an economic vision for British Columbia, one that is grounded in our strengths as opposed to chasing the weaknesses of others. You know, this year's throne speech also referenced some very important investment in childcare, education, addressing affordability, and improving transportation services. These clearly are important issues for British Columbia. Likewise, Honourable Speaker, we know that the wild salmon have an immense cultural, economic, and ecological value for British Columbia, and I'm glad to see again that this was recognized in the throne speech. And we can thank a lot of good work on this area came from my colleague from Saanich North and the Islands, whose advocacy for wild salmon led to the establishment of the Wild Salmon Advisory Council last year. And with the work of that council now complete, I expect, and I'm sure my colleague from Saanich North and the Islands will insist, that government will get to work and actually start implementing the recommendations, starting right up front with movements towards habitat protection and restoration of critical streams, salmon-bearing streams across British Columbia. We often focus on overfishing. We often focus on fish farms. Important things to focus on, but what we tend not to focus on is habitat destruction of the streams for which these salmon return. And that, Honourable Speaker, is critical in British Columbia. But with that said, with the good in the throne speech, I do tend to agree with my friend from Kamloops North Thompson that the throne speech looked a little bit like each minister was given a memo and asked to provide a couple of sentences about what they would like in the throne speech, and a rather disjointed potpourri of issues and items and things are slapped together in the throne speech, missing, critically, a broader overall vision as to where this government would head. Now, again, I do have some troubles with that, Honourable Speaker, because I listened with interest in question period today as the Transportation Minister went back to the tired narrative of saying you didn't do it for 5 years. At some point, Honourable Speaker, government needs to recognize that they're government now. They are not in opposition, and when you're government, it does not do you any service to blame someone for not doing something 5 years ago. You've had 2 years. We've been talking about ride-hailing for 2 years. You actually promised that it would happen last year. It hasn't. You've actually promised it would be one of the things you do immediately when the government got elected. It hasn't. So, you know, this is what we look for government. We look for leadership. We look for a vision. And we look for no longer passing the buck and blaming. You know, just as the BC NDP were tired of the BC Liberals turning around and referring back to the decadent era of the 1990s, I'm a little tired, honestly, about hearing the last 16 years of the BC Liberals. Let's move on. I think some of the BC Liberals are never get tired of hearing about the last 16 years, but some of them actually love them. But I really want to talk not about the last 16 years or, heaven forbid, the 1990s. Look, 1990s. I was in Montreal in the 1990s. Like, not relevant to me. Most people left BC. I was one of these people who left BC in the early 1990s. So let's get on with what we're going to do now. What is the vision? What is the vision that is actually driving the narrative of the throne speech? That, sadly, I think is missing. You know, a throne speech that tries to be all things to all people all the time ends up leading to contradictory legislation. It focuses on short-term policy instead of long-term outcomes. We start ending up doing things like campaigning on reducing hip and knee replacement lineups. We know that that's important, but we also know that the people over the age of 65 are typically those who need hip and knee replacements, except me, I'm under 65 and I need one. Nevertheless, if you're looking for short-term wins, so-called quick wins, that you can actually campaign on and say, look, vote me back in, I've done something that makes a real difference in your life, you campaign and you start talking about hip and knee replacement lineups. What about the structural issues in our society? What about things like the new economy? What about things like transportation? What about broad poverty reduction strategy that we're still waiting for? These require much more careful, detailed analyses and thought, frankly, and we should have seen much more of that articulated in this throne speech. We basically had a throne speech, reminded me a little bit of one of the last BC Liberal throne speech, which was quite full of self-congratulatory messages, quite light on details about what will be done, but smatterings of very populist things like cell phones. Like, what are we going to do with cell phones in BC, given that we have no jurisdiction in that area? Transparency in the bills. Well, I would suggest that if you go onto your TELUS account or Rogers account, all the transparency you want is there. The thing that troubles me is I spend $400 a month on cell phones, and that is a lot of money, and I think that's a lot of money for the average person. That's because I have my own personal cell phone as well as an alleged cell phone, and never the twain shall mix, keeping public and private stuff separate. Clean BC was highlighted in the budget, which is good. I mean, I'm glad that it is, but it made me worry when immediately, as if the last breath of Clean BC went out, and the next breath started talking about LNG. I'm looking forward to the LNG enabling legislation that we may be getting, and I'm looking forward to see whether or not the members opposite will believe that they should support this increasing level of generational sellout. Because I can tell you, we've made it very clear for more than a year now that the BC Greens will not support any enabling legislation for this generational sellout. What is going on with LNG, in case people haven't realized, is the BC Liberals recognize that in a global market, it's really tough to compete with the royalty structure we had in place. So the so-called deep well credits were extended to, in essence, long drilling credits, horizontal credit, so that in essence all natural gas exploration was subject to very, very enticing credits, tax credits for the proponents. Petronas accrued an awful lot of tax credits with it because it had a lot of investment in upstream fields. They brought those into the LNG Canada partnership. So the BC Liberals recognize that we're not going to make any money from the royalties. We make a lot from leases, but not so much from the royalties. So what they plan to do is they plan to make money down the road through the LNG income tax. The idea is when companies were making monies, BC would start making money too. Now the NDP have signaled out that this is, they want to get rid of that. They want to get rid of the LNG Income Tax Act, but I suspect they're going to need to keep a little tax credit portion in there. And that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. To give you a sense, Honourable Speaker, of the kind of head-shaking moment, when the BC Liberals gave away the natural gas, they at least required LNG proponents to use electricity in the compression of natural gas if, and only if, they're going to get the industrial rate of about 5.4 cents a kilowatt hour. In classic BC NDP economics, they decided that that's too rich, and they exempted that. So now natural gas can be burnt to produce electricity to compress natural gas. Well, here's the joke on that one, Honourable Speaker, is that they've given away the resource upstream because of the royalty structure and the credit structure, and now LNG Canada has access to natural gas, which is our resource, the people of British Columbia's resource, that now they can burn essentially for free to produce, in essence, to compress the natural gas. That couldn't have happened under the BC Liberals. This is part of the generational selling of the BC NDP on this. It's really quite mind-boggling that they would think that actually, on the one hand, they could talk about Clean BC, and in the next breath, on the other hand, start talking about LNG. Let's be very clear. Clean BC is an exciting economic vision that only takes us to 75% of our reduction targets. There's a 4 megaton gap, and guess what? Sorry, 6 megaton gap, guess what? 4 of that 6 megatons would be from LNG Canada if that were to go ahead. So it'll be interesting to see as we move forward with this, to watch government work with official opposition to see if they can deliver this. Because we'll be watching here with great interest to see, as we have a race for the bottom chase, to see who's going to actually give our resources away the most. Will it be the Liberals, will it be the BC NDP, or will it be the Liberals supporting the BC NDP? You know, one of the other things in the economic opportunity associated with Clean BC, of course, is a recognition in that plan that economics, the economic opportunity, and ecological stewardship go hand in hand. Never is that more obvious than things like wildlife preservation. We know, for example, with the willy-nilly approach we have to natural habitat destruction in this province, that we end up creating problems for ungulate populations from north to south and east to west, because we are putting in roads, logging roads, we're disturbing the land. These ungulates can't find a safe place. They can't get away from the predators. We spray glyphosate. Like, on what planet do we do this? To suppress the deciduous undergrowth in certain areas of logged pine forests, and we're surprised that ungulate populations are suffering. This undergrowth is both food for the ungulates, but also it's easy for them to escape through the deciduous undergrowth that's growing. So we seem to think it's economy here, or climate change there, or ungulate saving over here. We don't view in this province things as a whole. We don't ask and stand back, what is our vision for prosperity for this province that protects that which makes our province great, which is our environment, that accesses our resources which we've been blessed with in a manner that's sustainable, that actually is not race for the bottom economics, but actually builds prosperity locally and ensures that we're not only harvesting resources, we're building value added and shipping technology and the resources and the value added to our other jurisdictions. We seem to think in British Columbia, that somehow we're magically going to stop shipping raw logs away to other jurisdictions. Well, not with our timber license system. We're not going to change anything, because if I'm up in Fort Nelson or some jurisdiction and I'm a big multinational and I own the licenses for timber lots, I harvest them when I feel like or not feel like. And if I harvest them, there's no appurtenancy anymore in BC. It's to my advantage to avoid softwood lumber or to not have to internalize those externalities and ship those logs to US mills or to Asian mills for value added. That's wrong. But there's a role for government here. When we look at Vancouver Island mills, we ask the question, why have these not retooled? Why is it that we're the only jurisdiction that continues to harvest its last bit of old growth forest? Community after community after community in British Columbia is seeking to have old growth on Vancouver Island protected. But our mills can only process old growth. And the second growth, or the hemlock or the other species, get shipped raw elsewhere because we haven't retooled. So there is a role for actually government to provide incentive to allow mills to retool so that they actually can process the wood that we're actually shipping elsewhere. And they should do that, but there is no vision. There's no vision in this throne speech to do that. It's just a laundry list of various things. ICBC. We have self-congratulatory issues on ICBC. I would suggest that we need to take a step back and ask this, to use the words of the Attorney General, this dumpster fire, is it salvageable? Where are the big picture thinking of this? What about the potential of allowing competition? Should we not be having that discussion here? What about no-fault insurance? Should we not be having that discussion? It seems like we want to have a private insurance, but we don't. We want to have a Crown Corporation, but we don't. So again, it's messed up because instead of thinking about what's good public policy, we end up thinking about what's in it for our stakeholders. LNG, cell phone costs I covered, payday loans, really important, payday loans. But it's a shopping list. It's an item that's great. Let's pass the legislation, move on. You'll probably get no discussions here. It's hardly a substantive issue in a throne speech on which to hang your hat on. Ferry fares, okay, we're keeping them fixed again. Fine, fine. But why aren't we talking about shipbuilding in British Columbia? Why is it that we have in Richmond, one of the world's leading producers of electric storage systems for ferries, shipping their ferries, those systems to Poland, to Norway, where they build the ships and use these ferries? Why is it that we feel that it's not, why is it that our shipbuilding industry is hurting here? Why is it that we're not recognizing the opportunity for innovation in our shipbuilding sector in places like Nanaimo or places like Victoria or elsewhere, where we recognize that there are really only 3 classes of vessels that we need in British Columbia, small, medium, and large. We know that there's about 30 vessels in the BC coastal fleet, and we know the lifetime of a vessel is about 30 years. It's a no-brainer, Honourable Speaker, that we should be having a self-sustaining shipbuilding industry in BC where we bring in and service out the ferries. As we bring them in, we build one, we know one's coming off. That's called a self-sustained economy. That's an economy grounded in innovation, and it's missing it because there's no vision, no broad vision in the throne speech. You know, gaming revenue. So the fact we're even getting excited about gaming revenue is basically getting excited about a plight that affects some of our poorest people. When we start to build social programs based on gaming revenue, what we're really saying is those people who can least afford it, thank you very much for this tax on the poor, we're going to take it, and we're going to use it to give services to the poor. This, to me, is very troubling. Daycare, I'm very pleased, of course, very pleased with the announcement in the government about the daycare. However, again, we'd like to see a more integrated component of daycare with the school system, with K-12, because daycare really it shouldn't be viewed just as care, but also education. One of the things that does excite me is some of the partnerships that have been going on with school districts across British Columbia. We've got some pharmacare train corridor. Okay, that's kind of a vision. But it's not a vision BC is going to pay for. It's likely if it's going to happen, it's going to be US-led. Working with Washington State on innovation. Okay, that's great. If you're going to work with Washington and Oregon to build a tech hub area, you got to have something that you're taking into the negotiations, not just we're here too, let's be part of this. What is the plan? What is the vision for BC? What is our vision? Broadband for northern communities. Great. But what's the vision there? Just put some broadband in? Is there some vision? Why are we talking about LNG? Why isn't government actively going out, trying to get industries like Tesla, like BMW, like others, to build their manufacturing facilities in Terrace, in places up in the north that is on the rail line between Prince Rupert and Chicago, the gateway to Asia and the gateway to eastern U.S. This is how we build prosperity. It's by diversifying our economy away from our traditional narrative of only being hewers of wood and drawers of water. And that was the opportunity missed in this throne speech. You know, as I said, sure, most of the items in the throne speech are good, important, but they're not illustrative of a comprehensive vision or strategy for how the government can and will tackle the enormous challenges we're facing in terms of growing income inequality and, frankly, some of the environmental threats that face us. You know, I feel a little bit like I'm on the Titanic, trying to urge our captain to change course so we avoid the icebergs, the same icebergs that the member from Kamloops North Thompson suggested were melting at a very slow pace. I would suggest to him that they're melting faster than he thought. Anyway, so we can avoid the icebergs ahead. And instead of charting a safe passage, the captain turns to me and starts telling me about the dinner specials. You know, in the dining room, he offers me a free ticket to tonight's show. That is not what we want in a throne speech. Short-term perks and are fun and shiny, but I'm gravely worried about the future of the health and safety and security of British Columbians. You know, with Clean BC, we had a map for how we could avoid some of the threats on the horizon, while at the same time building a prosperous economic future. But it needs to be followed through urgently and in its entirety, and I look to the budget to ensure that, in fact, we see that happening. To come back to my analogy with respect to the Titanic, you know, the speech from the throne makes me worried that the captain is going to take the Clean BC map and say, great, we're saved, and get busy changing light bulbs without touching the steering wheel. You know, even worse, now the captain is looking straight at the LNG iceberg and hitting accelerate. Again, it's not that the pieces are inherently bad in the throne speech. The problem is how they're scattered with no structure to them. We'll not tackle the problems we all care about if we fixate on symptoms and not the actual system that created it. For example, the issue of the fentanyl crisis in British Columbia. Without a doubt, every single member in this House is concerned about the preponderance of deaths lately, often been between the ages of 30 and 60, at home. And these are not, you know, your typical homeless street people. These are people who are partying on a weekend. We're seeing numbers and growing numbers of deaths in this area. Our response, collectively, is to go after the harm reduction. Issue naloxone kits to everybody. Stop people from dying. Great. It's harm reduction. It's wonderful. But we know that when you just only focus on harm reduction, there are times when you're resuscitating the same person multiple times a day. We don't stand back and ask the following question. Why is it that these people are here in the first place, and what is the pathway to recovery? So an approach, taking this throne speech, would be like, we're going to give you naloxone kits. So the member from Powell River Sunshine Coast suggested it's not right, and I would suggest to him that show me in the throne speech where we have a discussion of the systemic issues that have led to the problems we have today. I would suggest as a working hypothesis. A working hypothesis is that we cut kids' support services at their critical years of development in the K-7 system when they needed it most. We cut the child psychologists, we cut the speech pathologists, we cut the assistants, and we're now dealing with the social consequence of those cuts a generation later. And we still don't have a pathway to recovery. We don't have that in place. We've had a Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions in operation for 2 years. For 2 years. And I'm still waiting to see an overall vision and direction for that ministry to actually tell us how that pathway for recovery is going to go. It's not just opening a clinic here or opening a clinic there. It's what is your plan and your strategy to actually get us out of this problem into the future. And 2 years is a long time, Honourable Speaker. 2 years is a long time. It can't blame previous government anymore. It's time to actually show us what you're made of. You know, because of the government's lack of vision in the throne speech, let me see if I can't offer something up that might be something that we could hang our hats on. You know, as we know, the BC Green Caucus, the three of us, we got into this business, politics, because we felt, each of us, that many of the decisions we are making here are really fixated on short-term goals. We're not thinking about the long-term consequences of our decision. We're thinking about re-election. How many people in this place have been here for greater than 15 years? An awful lot, frankly. Stay tuned as I bring in term-limiting legislation in a couple of weeks, because this place needs to change. We should not be having people sitting in this place for 30 years, 20 years. What value added are you bringing to here when this is all the life that you've known, is this building? It becomes a sense of entitlement. You think that you know how things work. This place only stays relevant if it is rejuvenated. It only stays relevant if we get new ideas coming in. It only stays relevant if we start bringing in these new ideas from across the province and that they're listened to. And unfortunately, many of these are not actually happening, because I look in government now, and I look in past government, and the power brokers in this government have been here since the 1990s in some cases, and many of the power brokers in the opposition have also been here in the 1990s. Rest of us might as well go home, because it's the 1990s Liberals arguing with the 1990s BC NDP. Who's losing out? British Columbians. It's time for us to actually clean this place up, and I'm looking forward for working with my caucus colleagues and others here to do just that as we see a rejuvenation in this place. You know, we got into this, as I said, because of our concern about the fact we're overlooking some of the longer-term problems that we somehow think, by wishing they weren't so, would go away. Issues like income inequality, growing income inequality. We have many, many examples in human history of what happens when income equality... Did I just hear that correctly? One member, whose name shall not be mentioned, just noted it was 420. I suggested that... I'll just leave it at that. Not with, yeah, I won't get too high and lofty over that one. Anyway, coming back to the issue of some of these defining issues that are much broader, we just assume that if we ignore them, they'll go away. We assume that income inequality that's been growing over time somehow will take care of itself. As I pointed out in human history, we have ample examples of what happens as income inequality grows. In each and every case, the end is clear. It ends in revolution and collapse. And that is a pathway that is not inconceivable. We're starting to see the rise of populist movements across the world, whether it be the rise of the Arab Spring. We see the Yellow Vest movement in Paris, which was about income inequality. You know, some deniers types seem to think it's about carbon tax. No, it was an income inequality issue. We see Brexit. We see the rise of Trump. We see the rise of Ford and campaigning with no platform apart from buck a beer. This is what we start to see. And this troubles me if we don't actually get a handle on some of these growing problems. Coming to government. Government promised to put people first. I don't know how many years I listened to government berate the Liberals for not increasing the housing allowance. We're waiting. Where's the housing allowance increases? Where are the housing allowance increases from the government that argued we needed housing allowance increases? They're not there. So really, again, we need to have a little more thoughtful look at some of these bigger problems. Climate change. You know, we're at a pivotal point in human history where we can ignore this problem, or we could recognize it's an incredible economic opportunity. We've got the foundations of that in Clean BC, but that plan needs to permeate each and every ministry. And I get worried when the architect of that, the Deputy Minister of the Environment, Bobby Plecas, an outstanding civil servant who put her heart and soul into the Clean BC plan, a plan that she had to deal with business stakeholders, NGOs, Green MLAs, government MLAs. She did a yo-person's job. But now she's no longer the Minister of Environment. That worries me, because that shows a change of priorities, that the government is shifting the best and brightest from a ministry that actually led to a foundational economic vision into some other ministry. You know, this is troubling, and people need to know that this is what's going on. So anybody who thinks this government is committed to climate action needs to know that in fact it's just superficial and surface layer deep, and if it were not for the BC Green Caucus, none of this would have happened. I can say that unequivocally because you cannot, on the one hand, I see the Minister of Agriculture saying, wow, you cannot on the one hand stand up and champion LNG and for any second think you have any credibility on a climate plan. The climate plan will take us 75% there, fine. We're still not 100%. Where's the government's vision to get 100%? It's not in the throne speech. Where's the government's vision to implement the Clean BC? It's not in the throne speech. It's really a government that looks to a box-fixing exercise, and that needs to change as we move forward. You know, elected officials in here will be held by history unkindly, will be looked upon unkindly by history for the actions that we take today. Future generations will look back on this time and look at the people in this room and elsewhere and ask them what they did and why they didn't do what they did. They'll ask, you know, one of two questions. They'll either ask the question, how did you have the moral fortitude to actually move with this and deal with this and recognize the opportunity that is there and take advantage of it? Or they're going to say, how could you have done this? How could you have ignored the scientific evidence? Way too many people in this room, way too many people in this room will fall in the latter category, and very few in the former. And sadly, most of those in the former are not in the decision-making capability in this government or in cabinet by itself. They're sitting in the backbenches down the end here. You got your climate caucus down the end here. Backbench government MLAs speaking passionately about climate. I don't hear it coming from the caucus, from down in the executive branch. I don't see it coming from executive branch. I hear good words coming from my colleagues down this end of the aisle. You know, we, as a BC Green Caucus over the past year and a half, have worked tirelessly with government to again, the smug arrogance coming from the member of Saanich South here, I would suggest is inappropriate. If she would like to discuss this further, I'd be happy to. But let me say, what about some of the promises you've made about Site C? This is a member who stood up and told people not to vote for the BC Greens because she needed to get elected because she would stop Site C. Take a look in the mirror, member from Saanich South, and then we can talk a little bit more about hypocrisy and saying whatever it takes to get elected. So we have a problem here, Honourable Speaker. We have a government that says one thing and does another. We have fish farms, again, with government. They said they would take fish farms out. No, we're going to talk about it and study it and have a plan for the future. Haven't done it. Again, let's be realistic. Government says it's going to do things, but it doesn't actually do it, and it studies a lot. Government needs to actually get the vision down there and start addressing this vision. You know, one of these, there's three areas that we've worked tirelessly on and will continue to do over the next 2 years. One is the issue of trust in government. The other is health and well-being, and the third is innovation, and I'll touch upon each of those three. Let's start off with trust in government. There is a cloud over this place. Allegations are filling the hallways of this building like never before. We've got the Speaker's report, 76-page report. We've got the government talking about money laundering. I'm sick and tired of listening to the government talk about money laundering. When are you going to do something about it? You have a landing page collecting lots of data on the BC NDP website, telling people to sign this petition if you're against it. Fine. You got your data now. What are you going to do about it? We've sat for 2 years and we've talked about the issue of money laundering. Hasn't been dealt with. I suspect that the political machinations of the powers that be like the idea that this is niggling in the background and makes the BC Liberals look bad on an ongoing basis. But you're elected to govern, and when you're elected to govern, you take leadership. And we need to see leadership on that money laundering because it has been sorely lacking. Lobbying reform. This is something that we campaigned on, that we got legislation through and passed, and we're pleased to see some of this, including, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this area of trusted government. Standing order reform. This place, an electoral reform. There is a lot that needs to be done still. You know, let's come to UNDRIP. Again, good words in the throne speech. Good words about UNDRIP. But that was supposed to happen this spring, and now we're told it's probably going to be in the fall. So on the one hand, we talk about UNDRIP, and then we talk about the Wet'suwet'en. And we recognize that right off the bat, we know for a fact that the BC NDP decided not to get involved, and instead of showing leadership in government-to-government negotiations, they thought it was LNG Canada's problem, and they should try to deal with the Unistoten camp and the Wet'suwet'en people. It's them to do it. And so LNG Canada does the only thing they know what to do, which is to seek a court injunction, and away we go. That is an absence of leadership. That is a government that missed an opportunity for truth and reconciliation, to actually stand with the Wet'suwet'en, to actually have a discussion on a government-to-government basis, not putting the company to do their dirty work for them. So again, we've got a failed history of colonialization in this province that continues to this very day. You know, coming back to the well-being of British Columbians, I see a shopping list in the throne speech, that misses some of the key things, like climate change. You know, we have an IPCC report. I'm so sick of IPCC reports, frankly. But another one says we got 12 years before we committed to breaking 1.5 degree. Frankly, I think that's wrong. We've already broken 1.5 degree. And the reason why it's wrong is it didn't account for the permafrost carbon feedback, not because they didn't know how to, but because it wasn't in the mandate. We know the world's warmed by 1 degree already. We know that we have a committed warming of about 0.6 degrees because of existing levels of greenhouse gases. That takes us to 1.8. We know that the permafrost carbon feedback gives us another 0.2 to 0.3. We know the world's going to warm between 1.8 and 1.9 degrees, regardless of what we do today. So this notion that somehow this is a problem down the road and maybe we could get to it is simply false. It's simply false, and history will not be kind to those who stand by and watch this happen. You know, there's a lot of important policies that have happened so far. These wouldn't have happened were it not for the BC Greens here. Now, I know we're not very good at telling our story. We've not been very good at telling British Columbians the effect we've had in this legislature. But the professional reliance reforms are a BC Green initiative. The Environmental Assessment Review was a BC Green initiative. Clean BC was a BC Green initiative. The Fair Wage Commission was a BC Green initiative. The Innovation Commission was a BC Green initiative. The Emerging Economy Task Force was a BC Green initiative. We've got the Salmon Council was a BC Green initiative. Lobbying Forum, a BC Green initiative. And if we had our way, we would have had ride-hailing in here 4 years ago, but we've got a government that seems to find any excuse it can to delay, and now today we have allegations coming during question period that in fact there's a cloud over that as well. Honourable Speaker, how on earth are we ever going to rebuild trust in this institution if we don't start to actually declare when there's potential perceived issues, and if we don't actually start putting people first instead of our vested interests first? It will never, ever change, Honourable Speaker, and shame on government, actually, shame on government for not knowing that this could be found out and recognized as it was done in question period today. I commend the opposition for their research on that, because that explains a lot, Honourable Speaker, to me. It explains a lot, because I sat on the first standing committee on Crown corporations, and I couldn't understand the objections that were being raised about Class 4 versus Class 5 license. I couldn't understand the objections that were raised about safety. Has anyone seen the video? The video of the taxi driver who was being pushed up a hill where a dude was sitting on a car, and he was sitting on the hood of the car with his feet on the taxi in front, and they were pushing the cab up the hill? Like, safety? It's a two-way street, Honourable Speaker, so government needs to really ante up on the ride-hailing, because British Columbians are sick and tired of the excuses. There are no more excuses. Lyft has been, and Uber have been committed to British Columbia. Lyft now owns Center Ice and Rogers Arena. You watch the Canucks, you see Lyft. They want to come here. If it were not for my colleague Adam, the member from Saanich North and the Islands, that legislation that was brought in before Christmas would have guaranteed that no ride-hailing would happen in British Columbia. His amendment to allow the Passenger Transportation Board to have greater leeway in terms of the decision-making was critical, because we know in talking to Lyft and Uber, they both would have walked if that amendment had not passed. That is a BC Green amendment, despite the government, because government really doesn't want ride-hailing, and I agree with members opposite. Government really doesn't want ride-hailing. They have yet to demonstrate a commitment to ride-hailing other than saying it's coming later this year. There's no excuse for it to come later this year, unless government decides that some friends and relatives who might have need a leg up or a year's lead to try to get their thing going. There's no other justification for it, and this is just not right. You know, I come back to the jobs. I take exception with the fact that members opposite said that they didn't mention jobs until line whatever. I frankly wish they would stop talking about jobs and stop talking about careers. People don't want jobs, they want careers. They want to know, they don't want to just go up to Site C and build a dam and then be unemployed. They want to know that they have a stable, long-term employment opportunities in our beautiful province and that they can live close to where they are. There is no vision for careers in the throne speech. Frankly, there's been no vision for careers in the opposition's comments to date. There's only been a few, and hopefully they'll flesh those out as we move forward. You know, we have right now ongoing in British Columbia a problem that was not even mentioned in the throne speech. We all know about the issue of the residential school era and the so-called 60s scoop. We know about those times. What is going on in British Columbia right now makes that pale into comparison in terms of the way MCFD is scooping children on First Nation reserves for the mere, at times, nothing. Mothers having their babies taken away in hospital. The threat of phoning MCFD being used in family arguments to settle scores. We have a systemic problem in MCFD in terms of the child welfare system and dealing with our Indigenous our communities and not allowing our children, their children rather, in these communities to be brought up by the community. We scoop them out and think that somehow government's going to do a better job by taking a baby from the nursing mother in hospital and shoving them in some foster home somewhere. This is a problem. This is what the government was elected to do, to look after people, to put people first. Not just, union jobs on CBA agreements, but people first. And that is what we need to get back to, because we forget why we're here. We sometimes forget why we're here. Again, the member from Saanich South, I would be delighted when the member from Saanich South actually did what she said she would do and start dealing with the fish farms in the wild sockeye migratory paths, because she hasn't. She's done the talk, door knocking, done the talk, but when push comes to shove, hasn't delivered. And it's like that on so many files. Talk the talk, but when it's come to government, not delivering. And that's what we need to get back to. Housing, our housing has become a playground for the rich, a bank account for international players to park money. One of the things that we supported in the speculation tax was the satellite family notion. It has created all sorts of problems with dubious claims on people should be on title or shouldn't be on title. This is going to be a problem, and I wonder to what extent government is actually monitoring the market, because there's a very real potential the market is going to go out of control. The government, in its wisdom, decided that it knew best as to the approach to actually introduce the speculation and vacancy tax. Now, I don't want to rehash that, but with that to say is that it is critical. It is absolutely critical with such a significant intervention tool in the market. The government is monitoring on a daily, weekly basis what's going on, because I can tell you, prices of houses are dropping. And most people can absorb a 10% cut. I don't think there's a lot of people in Vancouver worried about a West End house, a Point Grey house going down by 10%. However, if 10% turns 20, turns 25, then you start to get a problem, and then you start to have an escalation, and you start to have houses going under, people walking from mortgages, and so forth. So I certainly hope the government is looking at this speculation tax, and frankly, I think it should already be thinking about repealing it. Why do I say that? It's because the market is already tempered through uncertainty, and let's see if they are willing to actually take a look at that. There's issues that, again, I didn't see mentioned within the broader area about putting people first. Issues with respect to the LGBTQ2+ community, health and safety and equality. We've got the issues of the sexualized violence policies that are on university campuses. Has there been any follow-up? We certainly heard myriad stories about work that still needs to be done. We would like to see continuing working not only to deal with the issues of exploitation. We have some ideas we'll bring forward in a number of private members' bills this session, but there are very serious safety issues still prevalent within a number of our more marginalized communities, marginalized only in as much as they're minority and there are people who still exhibit a prejudice against such communities, and we will be bringing in some legislation in that regard. We, in the area of innovation, coming back to the issue of innovation, British Columbians, by their very nature, are innovators. It is who we are. Some of the best and brightest companies out there are BC-based or have started from BC. I mentioned MindSense. I haven't mentioned Carbon Engineering or, General Fusion. There's Saltworks. There's a ton of these companies. What we need to see is in the throne speech, what we were looking to see, hoping to see, was a vision that actually recognized that we have an economy, a diverse economy, that should be the foundation of us moving forward. A stable economy that would allow us to actually ensure that companies are connected with post-secondary institutions. Government seems to be void of an understanding that, in fact, there are companies out there. You've come to heckle from close by? So thank you. It looks like I've got a chorus just behind to heckle me now. So government seems to miss the opportunity that comes through partnership with industry and post-secondary institutions. We have opportunities in Squamish with the Clean Energy program out of UBC, which was an incredible opportunity for government to take the bull by the horns and to work with UBC, the Squamish Nation, the consortium in the Squamish area, to get innovation and to get those anchor tenants in there to build that clean energy centre, which is actually a foundation for the economy of tomorrow. We should be creating spaces in post-secondary institutions, spaces for postdocs, for students, for co-op positions. We should be creating spaces that would allow partnerships with industry, with our innovators, but we don't. We think education is here and industry over here, and not recognize that, in fact, they're coupled together and they work closely together. Our cooperative education policies need to be updated to ensure that students graduate with more hands-on experience. Right now, the demand for co-op is unsurmountable, yet it's difficult to actually find the positions, and it's difficult to seek the government to support to actually provide the value-added opportunities that we need to do. We should be looking at improving efficiency, developing technologies, and actually focusing on the value-added. And government has a role to play also in terms of innovation through the services that it provides and offers. There is in government, a really incredible innovative group that actually does do a lot of data innovation and things like that. However, government misses opportunities through innovation itself. I look at the CBA agreement. Let's be clear, the CBA agreements are nothing more than project labor agreements. They're not community benefit agreements. Let's stop pretending that they are. They're project labor agreements. And I understand that project labor agreements are needed for stability in some projects. However, government yet again missed an opportunity. It missed an opportunity through procurement phase to actually send a signal to the market as to the type of direction it would like to see the market go. Instead, government decides it's going to pick its 17 building trade unions, winners and losers, and say, what we're going to do is we're going to call it a CBA. It's not a CBA, it's a project labor agreement. And those 17 unions are the players, and no one else can play. How is that innovative? That's not. It's going back to fight the trade union wars of the early 20th century. Those wars are won. Let's move on. People are sick and tired of those wars. Let's move on and recognize that government has a role to signal to the market, and government should signal to the market, and it's missed that opportunity as it's moved forward. We've had a bunch of other issues that I could go on and on about. I guess the issue here about ride-hailing is one that hurts. In the throne speech, it says this year ride-hailing will enter the market. It doesn't work that way, government. Ride-hailing enters the market if ride-hailing companies want to participate in the market. They don't enter the market because you say they will. You have to create the regulatory environment that allows them to participate. And right now, if it were not for my colleague from Saanich North and the Islands, Uber and Lyft would have walked. They would have walked from this province before Christmas. And they're still close to walking because we have discussions at the table that are simply not relevant to ride-hailing, a complete and misunderstanding of the fundamentals of what the ride-hailing model is, the surge pricing model, the critical aspect of the surge pricing model, which allows them to work in partnership with the taxi fleet, which create a base supply of transportation, whereas the ride-hailing provides surge demand to allow more people on the road when you need it and get them off the road when you don't. These are opportunities that need to be properly set in stage through regulation. No more talking about it. Look, if I could write a bill as a private member's bill 3 years ago, opposition had an entire package ready for when government shifted. They were just waiting to get through the election. How is it the government has taken 2 years to continue to talk about this? Finally, I do want to come back and say I am pleased, while I've been rather critical of some of the lost opportunities, lack of vision, and kind of shopping list approach the government has taken in the throne speech, I will say that there is an opportunity before us, and that is through the Clean BC. It's not just about a ZEV standard. It's not just about a ZEV standard. That's necessary. What's critical is the electrification of our mining sector, electrification of forestry, electrification of our economy-wide. But again, just to point out how on the one hand, government says one thing, on the other, it does another. Right now, it's reviewing the IPP contracts. Now, we recognize that those were extortionate when they were first given out. However, there are many of these small power producers that are going to go under because government is actually not going to renew purchase agreements. Like, we've already had virtually every small energy company in BC leave the province because of the reckless decision of government on Site C, despite the guarantees of a couple of MLAs to their constituents that they must vote for NDP because a vote for the NDP will eliminate Site C, and that egregious trampling on Indigenous rights and fiscal recklessness in terms of building in an unsafe environment a mega project that's not needed, which also killed the clean energy sector. This is a real worry. What's government going to do to we talk about energy use, what's it going to do to actually get companies back here? Canadian Wind Energy Association, they've left BC. They're in Alberta right now. Timber West, I believe it was 5 First Nations, and EDP Renewables wanted to invest $700 million, not of your money, Honourable Speaker, not of my money, but of industry money on Vancouver Island to build a wind capacity in partnership with Indigenous communities on private land. But no, it's gone, walked, $700 million gone because of Site C. $700 million of industry money. Instead, it's going to be $10 billion of ratepayer money. We know that Site C is going to cause the doubling of hydro rates in BC over the next 5 years. It's the only way it can happen. We know that cost overruns are going to be egregious. We know the North Bank is unstable. We suspect that when they start drilling the diversion route, there'll be collapses. Good luck drilling a diversion route through the fractured shale there. This is yet another example of government not thinking this through. But with that said, there are huge challenges ahead. We will continue to approach our role in this government as one in opposition. We will continue to provide the advice that we think is warranted on bills that we think are relevant. We will continue to offer solutions. We will bring in private members' bills. We will offer British Columbians an opportunity that can actually bring truth and integrity and honesty back to this place, because frankly right now there's far too much saying and not enough doing. Do as I say, not as I do, and that needs to change in this legislature, Honourable Speaker. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to the comments of others on this throne speech.